So the pattern I've got right now, yeah, it's cool, but I'm thinking of adding a little more interest in it. All I'm kind of seeing is this big peachy diamond in the middle. And I guess note that I didn't have to add the seam allowance with the live paint. Like you can see the seam allowance here, the little black lines, the dashed lines, and you're not going to see those in the final product, obviously. But anyway, I'm adding another square to the very center of this quilt. So it's the same size square as you can see in the other quilt squares, and I'm just kind of playing with the color, figuring out what I like. Yeah, good enough. I'm not going to say it's like a thrilling quilt block, but this is just to show you guys my process. And I mean, I like doing more detailed patterns, but honestly, how many people want to sew like a super detailed cat face or ear of corn or lock and key square? I think a lot of people gravitate towards the like heritage prints, like the barn quilt style scene, and this is a really great way to easily mock up a huge square like that. So I'm just back to the first artboard, and I'm going to do this pattern that's in the very center of the quilt. So in order to make this new foundation paper piecing square, I'm taking the old one and modifying it. So at this point, you could either add more points to the square that you're creating, or like me, I'm just going to select it and drag it into place. Okay, so this little square marked number 8 is going to make up the very middle of the quilt, but obviously it doesn't, I mean, you can't just like take this pattern piece that we made and add another square to it. Um, I'm sure there's a way that I could finagle it to work, but instead of being so fussy, I'm just gonna create another pattern piece. So now we'll have 3 pattern pieces. One, the kind of foundation block that goes in most of the areas of the quilt, and then pieces 2 and 3, those just make up the very center part of the quilt. Okay, so I'm taking out this corner because in order to break this pattern piece up into 2, I've just copy pasted it and we'll be deleting parts of it from each one. So I'm adding a point here and here so that when I delete the corner, it won't delete the entire line. And if you're familiar with Illustrator, you'll know what this means. And if you're not, well, if you get a subscription, you figure it out pretty quick. But this entire bottom line would have disappeared if I didn't add another point in the middle. And I don't want that because I want to keep most of the quilt block that I made, I want to keep its integrity. So I've just taken away the extra little square in the corner and moving up the little points I made so that they're flush. Take away this number 8 because there's nothing there now. So instead of a 9-piece pattern, this is an 8-piece pattern. And now I'm going to make my little seam allowance buffer, which is a 1/4 inch thick. So all I do is I create this little rectangle and then I turn it. So wait until it says 0.25. Okay, perfect. And now I'm just going to rotate it at a 45-degree angle to match the line shown here. And I'm going to match it up with that. And then you can see the seam allowance is still in the shape of a square. And I actually want to make it into a sort of trapezoid. So I added a point and I'm moving the seam allowance over and up. So now it's a bit of an odd shape, but it will pair perfectly with the next little pattern that we're making to go with it. Alright, looks good. So now I can take this little buffer away and you can see the modification of this little pattern that I've made. So it's not too much of a difference. I've just removed a corner. And now with this next piece, I'm going to be just keeping the corner we removed and removing the rest of the pattern instead. So again, adding an extra point to each straight line. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete the unnecessary points. So we're just left with this little triangle at the bottom. Right. And getting rid of that square, and then this square in the middle, and all these numbers, because we're going to be renumbering this pattern. It's just a easy 1, 2, 3. And as for the seam allowance, yeah, I could delete the seam allowance and make a custom little piece, or I could just fit my buffer at this 45-degree angle and resize the seam allowance that I already have. So just dragging and dropping this down, and the in Illustrator, the black arrow up at the top left, that selects entire objects, and then the right arrow just selects points. So when I'm working in Illustrator, normally I just use black arrow, white arrow, pen tool, and sometimes live paint, and sometimes I'll create a shape like a rectangle. But I'm definitely not using the whole functionality of this program. But for me, this is it's kind of more fun and it's faster than actually sketching it in a sketchbook, because if I don't like something I've done, I could just select and delete it instead of, I don't know, turning a page. Right, so I'm going to go in and select these little corners and press Control J. That joined them. So you can see right there by my arrow, there's a little gap where I added a point. And I just want to make that a sharp corner again. It's not really important for the, I guess, finished pattern making process if I were to print this out. But if I were to paint it, I definitely do want this object to be closed. And now I'm going to do the same thing up at the other corner. So just select both points, Control J, and now you can see it's sharp again. And now I can get this buffer out of the way and label this. So I'm just going to start with the square, have that be number 1, top is 2, bottom is 3. I mean, you could honestly sew these in almost whatever order you want, but I usually like to start with the biggest piece first. And as we scroll up, you can see how that fits in with the pattern we just made. So this is a pretty easy modification. And I like to check that it actually fits in Illustrator before I go ahead and print it out. And now that I know that it works, I'm just going to select the object, this little triangular pattern piece, and nestle the seam allowance against the other seam allowance so that we have fewer cut lines when I do print this out to sew. All right, cool. So you can see we've got our 3 little pattern pieces and our custom quilt. And that's about it for today. Thanks for watching.